This set of slides is on designing investment policies relative to liabilities. So now we have all the ingredients to calculate the risk of assets to liabilities and their mutual correlations based on the parameters. So this is the set of correlations and covariance. And now we can put that into our mean variance optimization. And this is the liability mimicking asset portfolio that is generated. And just back on the covariance matrix, as it demonstrates, while the accrued benefit liability is highly correlated with nominal and real bonds, the future wage liability is highly correlated with equity. This is in line with our previous recommendation that accrued benefits can be hedged best with a combination of nominal and real bonds, and the most appropriate hedge for benefits due to future wages is dominated by equity. The reason for this is the joint growth component. Okay, so you put your correlations into mean variance optimization and you get a liability mimicking asset portfolio with 85% nominal bonds, 5% real rate bonds, and 10% equities. So the allocation of the company's liability mimicking asset portfolio is representative of the typical pay-related liability profile. However, the resulting allocation is sensitive to many liability structural factors, including the proportion of the future wage liability to the overall liability, the degree of inflation indexation, and the status of the plan. If the fund was less mature or it had a higher proportion of future wage liability, there would be a higher allocation to equities. If the plan offered full one-for-one inflation indexation via a cost of living allowance, you would see the nominal bonds replaced with real rate bonds. And if the plan was frozen and therefore no longer had any exposures to future wage growth, there would be no real rate bonds or equities, only nominal bonds. So in designing the investment policies relative to liabilities, the company could invest in this liability mimicking portfolio, as we just suggested, and this would be a low-risk investment. This means that the portfolio results in the best chance of tracking the liability as it grows and evolves over time. In addition, that this is also the appropriate investment benchmark. If the return on the fund's assets beats the return on the liability mimicking asset portfolio, all stakeholders should be satisfied since the pension promises will be paid. However, investing in the liability mimicking portfolio will not provide an expected return in excess of the liability, and therefore future service benefits and benefits earned by future participants would be offset by future cash contributions. So often this low-risk strategy will be too expensive for plan sponsors to maintain over a long run. Therefore, in most cases, we do not recommend investing in the low-risk portfolio, but only measuring investment risk against it. The challenge is to find the most efficient way to allocate more assets to higher returning asset classes such as equities, while minimizing the amount of unrewarded risk taken versus the liability. So we can approach that in two steps. We can hedge the liability with derivatives, or we could focus the remaining capital on efficient return generation. The liability relative approach often leads to different investment policies than the traditional asset-only approach. The traditional approach typically leads to 60 to 70% equities, with the remainder in short and mediate term duration and nominal bonds. The liability relative approach, on the other hand, leads to investing in long-duration nominal bonds, real rate bonds, equities, and derivatives to hedge the liability, with the remainder invested in well-diversified, return-focused components.